In the meantime, let's get some analysis. I'm joined by Greg Sheridan. He's foreign editor at The Australian. It's not often that ASD's out and about, but it's part of the new approach, I guess. Mike Burgess at ASIO and now Rachel Noble wanting to explain to people what our intelligence agencies do, Greg.
Yeah, so congratulations, Kieran. That was a great interview. And ASD is the cutting edge of our capability, and it's a critically important intelligence agency. So some years ago, I guess beginning with probably Dennis Richardson, the ASIO Director General came out of the shadows, and I think the government is very sensible to ask the intelligence agencies to engage in a good dialogue with the Australian people to inform them about some of the threats and some of our responses.
What's your take on the hypersonic missile development? This is expanding the remit of AUKUS between Australia, the UK and the US?
So, Kieran, look, I think AUKUS is a good thing. I'm a friend of AUKUS and a supporter of AUKUS. The only new thing in AUKUS is the idea that we will get nuclear-propelled submarines. AUKUS exists primarily at the level of symbolism at the moment. But it's very good that Joe Biden, Boris Johnson, and indeed our own Prime Minister want to symbolise the closeness of the alliance. The reason I say this is not to poo-poo anything, but we've been in the most intimate cooperation with the Americans about research into hypersonic missiles forever. There's nothing, it's not because we had an AUKUS seal of approval that we've somehow or other accelerated this. We've been intimately involved with them forever. One thing I think is a slight danger, though, is that the government, I think quite intentionally, understandably in this pre-election phase, is giving people the idea that something is actually going to happen about this in the near future. I even heard someone say we'll be manufacturing hypersonic missiles in us. Well, that'd be a bit miraculous because at the moment we don't manufacture any missiles at all. 2 years ago, the government announced that it would build a domestic missile manufacturing capability, and it took 2 years before it identified its industry partners, namely Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. Whereas everyone knew Lockheed Martin and Raytheon were the obvious partners right from the start. They build 90% of our missiles. They're the big missile-making companies. So I think in this pre-election period, so generally speaking, there's been a good government on national security, but in this pre-election period, they're selling a lot of folderol and pretending it's substance. I'd like them to answer a couple of questions. How many missiles are we getting? When are we getting them? Why do we have so few missiles? Why don't we build ground-launched missiles to dominate our northern approaches and so on? But there are no answers. The more specific the question, the less likely you are to get an answer.
What was your take on the detail involved in yesterday's announcement, $3.5 billion to expedite the acquisition of missiles for various platforms in the military?
Well, again, it was a very vague general announcement. We don't know how many years the $3.5 billion will be spent over. And this also included the acquisition of modern sea mines. We don't know how many missiles we're going to get. When they announced a previous category of missile, the long-range anti-ship missile, they announced that they would buy up to 200. And everybody had a laugh because 200 missiles wouldn't get you from morning tea to lunchtime in a serious military conflict. So this time they didn't tell us how many missiles they were going to get. But you go through our platforms, the Anzac frigates have 8 anti-ship missiles each, but the Anzac frigate is not a modern warship. You can't put the Anzac frigate up against a Chinese warship. That's just ridiculous. The 3 air warfare destroyers, they are modern warships. They've also got 8 anti-ship missiles each, but they've got 48 vertical launch cells, and you could put anti-ship Tomahawks in them. And we've got at the moment about 70-odd planes that could carry long-range missiles, so that's about 2 each. So my sort of crude amateur calculation, because the government won't give us any real information, is that we could deploy about 70-odd missiles at a time against any aggressor. Well, let me tell you, Kieran, you're not going to keep the Chinese at bay with 70 long-range missiles in service at any one time. So my problem is, I agree with all the government's rhetoric about the national security emergency and the most dangerous situation since World War II. But Defence is still producing its antique and irrelevant Defence Force structure, $30 billion on tanks and heavy armour and so on. We just cut out the only program we were going to have to produce an armed drone, the Sky Guardian Predator. God knows how defence could come to a decision that insane. And these missiles, although they're terrific, it's great. I'm very happy we're getting the longer range missiles, but we have them in such tiny quantities. And so that leads you back to what is the real baseline of our defence policy, which is the Americans will always take care of it for us. And I don't think that's good enough.
Yeah. Well, we're relying on the ally being the strong ally that it has been in the past, and that sovereignty question is a big one, Greg. But when you look at the missile equation, it's also made even more pertinent, relevant when you look at the situation in Ukraine right now and how pivotal that's been in holding back the Russian forces.
That's right. So 2 or 3 lessons out of Ukraine. One is that the stocks of missiles you have are absolutely critical. Because Ukraine has friendly borders with Hungary, Poland, Romania. So there are lots of places it can get replenishments from quickly. If we were ever in a real emergency and the Americans were too busy to help us, we'd be a long way from stocks. So that's one lesson. And we have no stocks of anything to fight any conflict. Second lesson is how powerful missiles and drones are. So Russia has thousands of tanks and they're all getting knocked out by these cheap shoulder-fired Javelin missiles. And they're also getting killed by drones that are not much more complicated than the things you can buy at Bunnings, but they launch weapons. Now, we have no drones. We must be one of the only defence forces in the world of our level of wealth and sophistication which does not have one single armed drone. And at a time when we've just shown that tanks don't work, even when you have thousands of them and air superiority and an environment that's good for them, we're going to spend $30 billion on tanks and tank-like heavy armoured vehicles. So we are not learning any of the lessons of Ukraine. The Defence Organisation in Australia is simply impervious to outside reality, and it has ruled the coalition government over these last 8.5 years. The coalition government has not imposed, good defence ministers like Brendan Nelson, he insisted that defence buy the Super Hornets when they said, no, the F-35s, the Joint Strike Fighters were enough. He was right. Christopher Pyne insisted that they develop the Loyal Wingman, whereas the Loyal Wingman didn't fit any of their acquisition processes and so on. But these are very rare instances of a government imposing itself on defence. What we've had is defence impose its ancient blueprints. Yeah. We've got the same force structure now as we had under Robert Menzies, and nothing has changed, even though the world has changed all around us.